Chapter 4 of The Bat. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterround. The Bat by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Chapter 4. The Storm Gathers. The long summer afternoon wore away. Sunset came, red and angry, a sunset presaging storm. A chill crept into the air with the twilight. When night fell, it was not a night of silver patterned and skied, but a dark and cloudy cloak where a few stars glittered fitfully. Miss Cornelia at dinner saw a bat swoop past the window of the dining room in its scurrying flight, and narrowly escaped oversetting her glass of water with a nervous start. The tension of waiting for some vague menace which might not materialize after all, had begun to prey on her nerves. She saw Dale off to the country club with relief. The girl looked a little better after her nap, but she was still not her normal self. When Dale was gone, she wandered restlessly for a time between living room and library, now giving an unnecessary dusting to a piece of bric-a-brac with her handkerchief, now taking a book from one of the shelves in the library only to throw it down before she read a page. This house was queer. She would not have admitted it to Lizzie for her soul's salvation, but for the first time in her sensible life she listened for creakings of woodwork, rustling of leaves, stealthy steps outside beyond the safe, bright squares of the windows, for anything that was actual, tangible, not merely formless fear. "There's too much room in the country for things to happen to you," she confided to herself with a shiver. "Even the night, whenever I look out it seems to me as if the night were 10 times bigger and blacker than it ever is in New York." To comfort herself, she mentally rehearsed her telephone conversation of the morning, the conversation she had not mentioned to her household. At the time it had seemed to her most reassuring. The plan she had based upon it adequate and sensible in the normal light of day. But now the light of day had been blotted out, and with it her security. Her plans seemed weapons of paper against the sinister might of the darkness beyond her windows. A little wind wailed somewhere in that darkness like a beaten child. Beyond the hills thunder rumbled, drawing near, and with it lightning and the storm. She made herself sit down in the chair beside her favorite lamp on the center table and take up her knitting with stiff fingers. Knit 2, purl 2. Her hands fell into the accustomed rhythm mechanically. A spy peering in through the French windows would have deemed her the picture of calm, but she had never felt less calm in all the long years of her life. She wouldn't ring for Lizzie to come and sit with her, she simply wouldn't, but she was very glad nevertheless when Lizzie appeared at the door. "Miss Neily?" "Yes, Lizzie." Miss Cornelia's voice was composed, but her heart felt a throb of relief. Can I sit in here with you, Miss Neily, just a minute?" Lizzie's voice was plaintive. "I've been sitting out in the kitchen watching that Jap read his funny newspaper the wrong way and listening for ghosts till I'm nearly crazy." "Why, certainly, Lizzie," said Miss Cornelia primly, "though," she added doubtfully, "I really shouldn't pamper your absurd fears, I suppose, but—" "Oh, please, Miss Neily." "Very well," said Miss Cornelia brightly. "You can sit here, Lizzie, and help me work the Ouija board. That will take your mind off listening for things." Lizzie groaned. "You know I'd rather be shot than touch that uncanny Ouija," she said dolefully. "It gives me the creeps every time I put my hands on it." "Well, of course, if you'd rather sit in the kitchen, Lizzie—" "Oh, give me the Ouija," said Lizzie in tones of heartbreak. "I'd rather be shot and stabbed than stay in the kitchen any more." "Very well," said Miss Cornelia. "It's your own decision, Lizzie, remember that." Her needles clicked on. "I'll just finish this row before we start," she said. "You might call up the light company in the meantime, Lizzie. There seems to be a storm coming up, and I want to find out if they intend to turn out the lights tonight as they did last night. Tell them I find it most inconvenient to be left without light that way." "It's worse than inconvenient," muttered Lizzie. "It's criminal, that's what it is, turning off all the lights in a haunted house like this one, as if spooks wasn't bad enough with the lights on. Lizzie!" "Yes, Miss Neily, I wasn't going to say another word." She went to the telephone. Miss Cornelia knitted on. Knit 2, purl 2. In spite of her experiments with the Ouija board, she didn't believe in ghosts, and yet there were things one couldn't explain by logic. Was there something like that in this house? A shadow walking the corridors? A vague shape of evil drifting like mist from room to room till its cold breath whispered on one's back and there! She had ruined her knitting, the last 2 rows would have to be ripped out. That came of mooning about ghosts like a ninny. She put down the knitting with an exasperated little gesture. Lizzie had just finished her telephoning and was hanging up the receiver. "Well, Lizzie?" "Yes'm," said the latter, glaring at the phone. "That's what he says. They turned off the lights last night because there was a storm threatening. He says it burns out their fuses if they leave 'em on in a storm." A louder roll of thunder punctuated her words. "There," said Lizzie. "They'll be going off again tonight." She took an uncertain step toward the French windows. "Humph," said Miss Cornelia. "I hope it will be a dry summer." Her hands tightened on each other. Darkness. Darkness inside this house of whispers to match with the darkness outside. She forced herself to speak in a normal voice. "Ask Billy to bring some candles, Lizzie, and have them ready." Lizzie had been staring fixedly at the French windows. At Miss Cornelia's command she gave a little jump of terror and moved closer to her mistress. "You're not going to ask me to go out in that hall alone?" she said in a hurt voice. It was too much. Miss Cornelia found vent for her feelings in crisp exasperation. "What's the matter with you anyhow, Lizzie Allen?" The nervousness in her own tones infected Lizzie's. She shivered frankly. "Oh, Miss Neily," she pleaded. "I don't like it. I want to go back to the city." Miss Cornelia braced herself. "I have rented this house for 4 months and I am going to stay," she said firmly. Her eyes sought Lizzie's, striving to pour some of her own inflexible courage into the latter's shaking form. But Lizzie would not look at her. Suddenly she started and gave a low scream. "There's somebody on the terrace!" she breathed in a ghastly whisper, clutching at Miss Cornelia's arm. For a second Miss Cornelia sat frozen. Then, "Don't do that!" she said sharply. "What nonsense!" But she looked over her shoulder as she said it, and Lizzie saw the look. Both waited in pulsing stillness. 1 second. 2. "I guess it was the wind," said Lizzie at last, relieved, her grip on Miss Cornelia relaxing. She began to look a trifle ashamed of herself, and Miss Cornelia seized the opportunity. "You were born on a brick pavement," she said crushingly. "You get nervous out here at night whenever a cricket begins to sing or scrape his legs or whatever it is they do." Lizzie bowed back before the blast of her mistress's scorn and began to move gingerly toward the alcove door. But obviously she was not entirely convinced. "Oh, it's more than that, Miss Neily," she mumbled. Miss Cornelia turned to her fiercely. If Lizzie was going to behave like this, they might as well have it out now between them, before Dale came home. "What did you really see last night?" she said in a minatory voice. The instant relief on Lizzie's face was ludicrous. She so obviously preferred discussing any subject at any length to braving the dangers of the other part of the house unaccompanied. "I was standing right there at the top of that there staircase," she began, gesticulating toward the alcove stairs in the manner of one who embarks upon the narrative of an epic. "Standing there with your switch in my hand, Miss Neily, and then I looked down and—" her voice dropped. "I saw a gleaming eye. It looked at me and winked. I tell you this house is haunted." "A flirtatious ghost?" queried Miss Cornelia skeptically. She snorted. "Huh! Why didn't you yell?" "I was too scared to yell, and I'm not the only one." She started to back away from the alcove, her eyes still fixed upon its haunted stairs. "Why do you think the servants left so sudden this morning?" she went on. "Do you really believe the housemaid has appendicitis, or the cook's sister had twins?" She turned and gestured at her mistress with a long pointed forefinger. Her voice had a note of doom. "I bet a penny the cook never had any sister, and the sister never had any twins," she said impressively. "No, Miss Neily, they couldn't put it over on me like that. They were scared away. They saw it." She concluded her epic and stood nodding her head, an Irish Cassandra who had prophesied the evil to come. "Fiddlesticks!" said Miss Cornelia briskly. more shake